Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Vav Amud Beis, 6b of Maseches Kiddushin, bottom line of the page. The Gemara says, Amar Rava. Rava said, Ten mana leploni v'akadesh, top of the next page, v'akadesh ani lecha. So if a woman tells a man, you take your money and give it to so-and-so, another man, and say the words, Rashi says, he would have to say as he gives it to that man, Harayat mikudeshes li, to the woman. He tells the woman, Harayat mikudeshes li, you are betrothed to me when I give this money to that man. The halacha is, surprisingly, mikudeshes. She is betrothed. How does that work? The Gemara says, midin arev. It works using the din, the laws, the concept that we find by an arev. An arev is a guarantor. Explains the Gemara, arev, how does a guarantor work? Lav af al gav de lo mati hanal liyade. Isn't it that even though he doesn't actually receive any hana, any benefit, any money, still kameshabed nafshe, he still attaches himself, he still creates a obligation upon himself, even though he's not getting anything. An arev, which Rashi tells us it's a din Torah, it's a doraisa concept, that there's such thing as a arev, as a guarantor, that it's possible for someone to accept responsibility for someone else's loan. So if Ruvain lends Shimon money, then when he gives him the money, Levi, who agreed to be guarantor, now has an obligation to Ruvain to pay Ruvain if Shimon won't pay. But he created an obligation upon himself, or an obligation was created upon him, even though he's not actually getting anything, this third party. He's just agreeing to be a guarantor. So we could create shibudim, we could create obligations, we could create a connection between the guarantor and the person and the lender, even though the guarantor is not receiving anything. So the Gemara says, Rava is saying the same thing can work for a woman. That hay itza, this woman Nami also, afal gavdolo mati hana aliyada, even though she's not actually receiving any benefit, kameshabda umekanya nafsha, she can still be meshabig herself, obligate herself, and mekanya and transact and causing acquisition of herself through this din of arev, that when the man gives the money to another man, then she now makes herself like an arev, a guarantor. She's not a guarantor, she's becoming a wife, but it can create obligations upon her, it can create an acquisition of her over to the husband. That's the first halacha that Rava teaches. Now he teaches us another halacha. The Gemara continues, Helach mana viskadshi liploni, mikudeshes midin evet kanani. So this sounds like a classic case of a shliach, of an agent, of being mekadesh a woman through an agent. If a man tells a woman, take this money, and you'll be mikudeshes to so-and-so. Now obviously that so-and-so has to have agreed and appointed this person as an agent. But if he does that, so that can work. So again, if Ruvain gives money to, or makes Shimon his agent, it seems that's how it would work here, and Shimon now goes to a woman and says, take this money and you'll be mikudeshes to the first guy, to Ruvain. So Rava says that works. And how does it work? Midin eved kinani. Oh, I should just mention one detail here. The important detail here is that the money belongs to the agent. It doesn't belong to Ruvain. It's not Ruvain's money that he's giving to Shimon to give to the woman. Ruvain is the agent here, Shimon, I think in our story. Shimon, who's giving the woman the money, it's his own money. He's saying, take this money and you'll be mikudeshes to Ruvain. He asked me to give you money. And Ruvain's not paying anything for it, for the Kiddushin. So Rava says that works also. So it's not your classic case of shliach of your agent, because in this case, the money actually belonged to the agent, and there's no plan for him to be paid back. So, but that still works. How does it work? Midin evet kanani. So here we can learn from the halacha that exists by an evet kanani, by a Canaanite slave, That in Eved Kinani, the Gemara explains, Lav afal gav de lo kachasar v'lo midi, even though he doesn't lose anything in order to be redeemed, kakani nafshe, he can still acquire himself. In other words, there is a way for an Eved Kinani can redeem himself if he could by paying, but he can also be redeemed by other people paying to free him. So he's not giving up anything. He's not giving any money, and yet he's acquiring himself without paying. Someone else is paying for him. So, and he goes free. And even though he's not losing anything, there's nothing coming out of his wallet, still he can acquire himself. So too explains the Gemara, Hai Gavranami. So this man too, even though he's not losing anything, it's the agent who's paying for the Kiddushin. So he can still acquire a wife. So even though Reuven in this scenario didn't pay any of his own money for the Kiddushin, it was all Shimon's money. Shimon gave it on behalf of him, his own money, on behalf of Reuven. Reuven can now become Mikudeshes to the woman. He can be betrothed to the woman. He doesn't have to give something up to acquire her as a wife. Just like an Eved Kanani, to go free, a Canaanite slave to go free, he can acquire himself without paying anything. We see an acquisition could be made without actually having to give anything up. Someone else could be the one to give something up on your behalf. So that's two halachos. The first halacha that Rava taught was that if a woman says to a man, give money to him, to a third party, and I will become Mikudeshes to you, that works like a guarantor, because shibudim, obligations, and a transaction can be created even though she's not actually receiving anything, just like an Arev has obligations, a guarantor has obligations without receiving anything. That was the first halacha. The second halacha is that an agent can give his own money to a woman to be Makadesh another man, on behalf of another man. Even though that man is not giving anything of his own up, still the Kiddushin works. Yeah, obviously he has to want it, he has to be willing, but that can work. So now Rava is going to take these two halachas and he's going to combine them with a very novel idea. And he says, if you have 10 mana leploni, if the woman now says, like in the first case, she says, give money to so-and-so, which was our first case, v'akadish ani lo. But the difference is, she's now saying, I will become mikudeshes to him. So give him money, and I will be mikudeshes to that guy that you gave the money to. It works, says Rava, mikudeshes midin shneim. That kiddushin works with a combination of the two ideas that we mentioned before. So just to get the case clear, the woman is giving the money to, she's not giving money. She's telling the Reuven, let's say the first man, give your own money to Shimon, and I will now be mikudeshes to Shimon. And that works. A combination of the two ideas that we mentioned before. How does that work? So the Gemara explains, Arev, when it comes to a guarantor, Lav afal gav de lo kamati hanal liyadeh, even though a guarantor isn't actually receiving anything, kameshabe nafshe, he can obligate himself. Even though the money's going to someone else, it can create obligations on me. So hay itzanami. So this woman also, afal gav de lo kamati hanal liyada, even though she's not actually receiving any benefit, the benefit's going to a third party, kamekanya nafsha, she can obligate herself. So that's the first step, which was the same as before when we brought in Arev, that the fact that she's not receiving anything, that someone else is receiving money, that still works, just like an Arev, just like a guarantor creates he can have an obligation created on him, and a connection sort of to the lender without actually receiving anything. So too, she can have obligations and a connection to this man created, even though she's not receiving anything, as long as someone else is receiving something. Now, the Gemara points out that we're not quite finished yet. Mi dami? But is it really similar to Arev? There's a major difference between this and Arev. Arev, when it comes to a guarantor, Haidika kanile kachaser mamona. When it comes to an arev, the one who is receiving the acquisition is losing money, is the one giving up money. In the classic case of arev, a lender lends money, and now he makes an acquisition of an arev. He now has the guarantor that he acquires, or that he creates shibudim on, he creates obligations on a lender. That's the person who gave up the money makes that connection. And similarly, in the first case of Rava, the man is giving money, Reuven is giving money to Shimon, and he's giving something up, and now he's acquiring the wife. But the one who's giving it up is the one who's acquiring the wife. But that's not what's going on in this case. Hai gavra kakani la hai itza. V'lo kachaser v'lo midi. But in our case, the man who's acquiring the wife isn't giving up anything. Because our case is where she tells Reuven, give money to Shimon, and that will create a connection between me and Shimon. Shimon's not the one giving any money. It's true in terms of arev, we have what we need. That an obligation can be created when you give to a third party, but it's to the wrong person. Here it's to the person who's not giving anything up. So the Gemara says, yeah, but Eved Kanani yochiach. But Eved Kanani, what we learned from Eved Kanani, from the Canaanite slave, that can prove that this could work. Because by Eved Kanani, de lo kachaser mamona, v'kakani nafshei. Eved Kanani doesn't lose anything, and yet he can acquire himself. Meaning, a Canaanite slave can go free without giving anything up. As long as someone else pays for him to go free, redeems him, he can go free, he can acquire himself. So we see that you don't need to give something up, to lose something, to acquire something. So therefore, in our case, where the first man is giving money to the second man, Reuven's giving money to Shimon, and she wants to create an obligation out to Shimon, a connection, and a Kiddushin out to Shimon. But we said, but Shimon didn't give anything up. We say, well, you don't have to give something up. We see that from Eved Kanani. Shimon doesn't lose. In fact, he gains, but he's not losing anything, but that's okay. You don't have to lose in order to acquire. So the Gemara says again, though, back the other way, mi dami. Is this similar to Eved Kanani? Hasa amhach dekamakni kakani. By the Eved Kanani, the one who is being makne, who is giving something up here, meaning in that case the owner of the Eved is the one who's acquiring the money. In the case of Eved Kanani, the person who's receiving the money is the one who is being makne, who is giving over the Eved. But here, hay itza k'mekanya nafsha v'lo k'kanya v'lo midi. But here, the woman is the one who's giving something up, herself in this case. She's causing herself to be acquired, but she's not receiving anything. So it's not really like Eved Kanani. Eved Kanani, the owner of the Eved, receives, and then the Eved can go free, can be acquired without him actually giving something up. Fine. But here, the woman who is making the transaction, she's not receiving anything. So it's not really like Eved Kanani. So the Gemara says, yeah, but Arev yochiach. But Arev proves to us that that's not necessary. Because Arev, afal gav de lo kamati hanaliyade, mishabig nafshe. Because an Arev shows us, the idea of the guarantor shows us that even though you're not receiving anything, you could still be mishabig yourself. You could still obligate yourself. So we see that even someone who's not receiving anything can create obligations on themselves. A guarantor doesn't receive anything. The money goes to a different person, and now it creates an obligation on him. He gives something up. He now owes, owes of himself. So too, this woman, it's true she's not receiving anything, and she's being makneh herself, but that's fine. We see that from Arev, that even when you don't receive anything, you can still be makneh yourself. You can still transact, give over yourself. So we have a very fascinating case that seems to stand at the end of the day, that Rava is teaching us that not only Rava taught us three cases. Number one, if a woman tells a man, give money to a third party, Reuven, give money to Shimon, and I'll become mikudeshes to you, Reuven, to the first man, That's the first halacha that works, arev, because that's like a guarantor. We could create a shibud, we could create an obligation and a connection, even though the money goes to another party. The second halacha was that if a man gives a woman money of his own, but says, I'm giving you money, but you should be mekudeshes to a different man. Shimon gives money to the woman and says, but you should be mekudeshes to Ruvain. That works. Even though Ruvain's not giving anything up, you don't have to give something up to acquire. We see that from Ebed Kanani, who can be redeemed by others and acquire himself, even though he doesn't give anything up. And then Rava said there's even a combination of that. That if a woman tells a man, give money to so-and-so, and I will become mekudeshes to him, so even though he didn't give anything up, that's okay, because we see from Ebed Kanani that he doesn't have to give something up to make a kinyan. And even though she, the other thing was the arev, that even though, excuse me for a second, right, even though the person who is giving up isn't receiving anything, in this case the woman, even though she's not actually receiving anything, but that's okay, she could still be makneh herself, because we see from arev that even though you don't actually receive anything, you could still create obligations on yourself. Okay. Bayi Rava. Now Rava has a question. Helach mana v'akadish anilach mahu. If a woman says to a man, here's money, and I want to be mekudeshes to you, what's the halacha there? Is it possible for that Kiddushin to work? Again, the woman gives the man money and says, I want to be mekudeshes to you. Can that work for Kiddushin? So, Amar Mar Zutra Mishmeder of Papa, mekudeshes. Let's just add one more detail. The case is, Rashi says, where after she says, take this money, I'll be mekudeshes to you, the man takes it and says to her, hiskadshi li bekach. With me accepting it, I'll become mekudeshes. Meaning, we want to maintain that the man is saying the words. The only thing is that the woman is giving the money to him. Can that work for Kiddushin? So Amar Mar Zutra Mishmeder of Papa mekudeshes. That it works for Kiddushin, even though the woman gave the money. So we don't understand this. Amar le Rav Ashi le Mar Zutra. Rav Ashi said to Mar Zutra, how is this working? He's assuming at this point that it's working using a kinyan agav. Agav means like by the wayside, by the side. And what it means is sometimes I can, let's say if I buy a field and I make a proper kinyan on the field, one of the kinyan, one of the methods of acquisition that works, then not only can I acquire the field, I can acquire metaltal and movable objects as well along with the field. So we think that maybe that's what's going on here. The man acquires the money, and agav, and on the side he also acquires the wife along with the money. Perhaps that's how it's working. So the Gemara says though, im kain, if so, havale nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus, niknen im nechasim she'en lahem achrayus. The problem is that it will come out that you're acquiring nechasim, possessions that have achrayus. That achrayus means responsibility. It means that there could be a lien on them. We have an idea that fields and people are considered like fields. There's a hekesh, they're compared to them in terms of the halacha. They are called nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus. They have achrayus, they have a lien. In other words, if a person lends someone money, let's go the other way. If a person borrows money and they have a bunch of fields, so they have they have plenty of property to pay back from if they can't pay back the loan, but then they sell all that property. So that's called nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus. We could collect, there's a lien on those fields, and we could collect those fields from the buyers to pay back the loan that preceded the sale of those properties. However, metaltalin, movable objects, do not have a lien on them. So if you sell your camera, your smartphone, so it's gone. The debtors cannot go after that phone from whoever bought it. They can't go after metaltalin. So, and money is metaltalin. Money is something that's movable. So, in general, so it seems from this, here he's giving her money, she's giving him money, and he's acquiring the money, and he's acquiring her on the side. So he's acquiring metaltalin money, which is ein lahem achrayus, there's no lien on that, meaning there can't be a lien on that. There's no loan in this case, but it's how we define the type of possession. It's ein lahem achrayus, there's no responsibility, there's no lien. Along with her, which is nechasim sheyesh lo achrayus, which is something that would have achrayus, it would have a lien on it. So, if that person was a sellable slave, but that's what people are considered in that category. So therefore, that's what it seems. But the problem is that doesn't work. Vanan ipchatanan, we learn the opposite in the Mishnah. Nechasim she'ein lahem achrayus, niknin im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayus. That it only works the other way. That nechasim, possessions that don't have a lien, can be acquired alongside possessions that can have a lien. The kesef, b'shtar, b'chazaka, whether that field, by like a field, it can be purchased with money, with a document, or with a chazaka, with the certain actions that acquire it, that affect a kinyan, affect the acquisition. But it only works the other way. You could acquire a field and get metaltalin on the side. So you could acquire the wife, the woman, and get the money alongside, but you can't acquire the money and get the woman along with it. So that can't work. So how is this working? How come we said that mikudeshes, that where she gives him money, he could acquire her, she becomes betrothed to him? How does that work? So Amar Le, so Mar Zutra said back, Mar Zutra was the one who said it works. He said, Mi savras to Amar Le agav hacha, agav? Do you think that it's working through agav, through this acquisition on the side, which we're saying would not work in this scenario? That's not what I meant. Hacha be'adam chashuv askinan. Here, the case is, we're dealing with a person who's very prominent, very important. Debahi hana dekamekabel matana mina, that there's a hana, there's a benefit that he's accepting her gift. Right? It's a great honor to be able to present a gift to the president, or someone who's very prominent. And that itself has a monetary value, to be able to, people pay big money to be able to have a meeting with famous, prominent people. So that has a value, to be able to give him this gift of money. So the fact that he is we're talking about an adam chashav, someone who's very prominent and important, and there's a hana, there's a benefit to her in that he's accepting her gift, and it's that hana, that benefit, gamra umakanya leinafsha, that she is accepting, because he's giving that to her for free, so she has a benefit. That is what she's accepting as the Kiddushin, to be makna herself, to give herself over. So there is a way that a woman could be Makadish herself, or that a man can be Makadish a woman, he has to say the words, but by accepting money from her, and that is if he's very prominent and there's a value to her in him just accepting the money, because such a thing would normally cost money for her, to be able to have their opportunity, but he's giving it to her, so that hana, that benefit, can be the Kiddushin. Itmar nami mishmei de Rava. It was also said in the name of Rava, v'chein le'inyan mamona. Those two halachos that we taught at the beginning today are also true when it comes to monetary values. So the idea that we learned from Arev, from a guarantor, and the idea that we learned from an Evet Kanani, that so for example, Rashi explains to us, if a person sells a field, and he says, give the money to, Reuven says, give the money to, I guess we'll make three people here. Reuven is the one who's trying to sell a field, and he wants to sell it to Shimon, and he tells Shimon, instead of paying me, you could pay Levi. Give Levi some money, and my field will become yours. So that works midin arev. That works like a guarantor, because even though Reuven, the owner of the field, isn't actually receiving anything, he's not receiving money, but when Shimon gives money to Levi, it can create obligations on Reuven. It can make him a guarantor. In this case, it makes him transact the field over to Shimon. And then the other case we had was if a person would say, and if we would apply it to money, to a transaction like this, so if a person would say, if let's say Shimon goes to Levi and gives Levi his own money, Shimon says, "Here, Levi, take my money, and when you accept my money, your field will become a different person's, will become Reuven's." So that works too, like Evet Kanani, because you don't have to actually give something up to acquire something. So Reuven can acquire the field without actually giving anything up. Just Shimon can give money to Levi, and then the field could become Reuven's, because Reuven doesn't have to give anything up, just like we have by Evet Kanani, by a Canaanite slave. He could be redeemed without giving anything up and acquire himself without paying. Somebody else could pay for him. So Rava said that these halachos are true by mammon, by money as well. And the Gemara says utzricha. And we need Rava to tell us that it's true both by Kiddushin and by money. Di'iyashmu'inan Kiddushin, if he only taught it to me about Kiddushin, mishum daha itza nichala b'chol dehu. I would say that it's because a woman is happy to get married and needs a very minimal type of kinyan, type of acquisition, type of transaction, because she's very ready to be married. Kidder Reish Lakish, like Reish Lakish taught. De'amar Reish Lakish, that Reish Lakish said, Tav l'mesav tandu mi l'mesav armala, that a woman much more prefers to live together with someone else than to live alone. And therefore, she is willing to be makneh herself, to transact herself, to become acquired as a wife with a lesser level of gemiras das, of intent needed to effect a transaction. So maybe it will only work over there. Aval mamona imalo. But maybe by a monetary transaction, maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe it would take more of a transaction to effect a sale. V'yashmina mamona. And had he only taught it to me that it works by a sale, I might have said it only works there mishum disyahiv l'mechila. A sale can work actually in a very minimal type of way. It could work through mechila, through forgiving something. A person can be mochel something over to someone, forgive it. So you don't even really need a real transaction to, in certain situations, to give something up. So maybe there I would think that these sort of interesting ways, methodologies of transaction could work by a sale. Aval Kiddushin emalo. But maybe I would say it wouldn't work for Kiddushin, tzricha. That's why it was necessary to teach it by Kiddushin. So it was necessary to teach it by both, because Kiddushin, we might think it would work only there because she's very willing to have it work. She really wants to get married. So maybe it works there, but not by a sale. Or I might say it only works by a sale because selling transactions like that can work even through mechila, through forgiving. So that's why you have to tell me it works through both. It works by both. These types of kinyanim can work by both scenarios, Kiddushin and monetary transactions. Amar Rava. Rava teaches us another idea. Hiskat shili l'chatzai mikudeshes. If a man says, you are mikudeshes, you are betrothed to me, to half of me, that works. Even though he only said to half of me, it works. But if he says, chatziech mikudeshesli, but if he says half of you is mikudesh to me, is betrothed to me, eina mikudeshes. That doesn't work. She's not mikudeshes. Half of me works. Half of you, the woman, doesn't work. Amar le Abaye l'Rava. Abaye said to Rava, Ma'ishna chatziech mikudeshesli de'ena mikudeshes. What's the difference that you're saying that if he says half of you are mikudeshes to me, it doesn't work? Because you'll tell me, Abaye is anticipating the reasoning. He says, Isha amar Rachmana v'lo chatzi Isha. You'll tell me because the Torah said, Kikach ish isha, when a man takes a wife, it means when he takes a whole wife, not a half a wife. So that's why if he says half of you should be mikudeshes, it doesn't work. But if that's the case, hachanami, but here also, ish amar Rachmana v'lo chatzi ish. It says when a man takes a wife, and not when half a man takes a wife. So why would it work for a man to say, you should be mikudeshes to half of me? So Amarle, so Rava responded, Hachi hashta. He said, hold on a second. Hasam itzalabe lo chazia. That's because a woman cannot marry two men in halacha. even according to the Torah, a woman can't marry two men. So what would it mean, half of you should be Mekudeshes to me? What about the other half? It's not like she could marry someone else with her other half. So that's why that language doesn't work. Elagavra, but a man, mi lo chazi lebeitre, couldn't a man marry two women? According to Torah law, a man can marry two women. V'hachi kamerla, so this is what he would be saying to her. When he says, you should be Mekudeshes to half of me, he doesn't mean to half of me. What he means is, to iba'ina lemitzav achrisina sivna. I want you to know that if I want to marry another woman, I should be able to marry another woman. You shouldn't hold me back. I'm only being Mekudeshes to you that half of me. Because I want to leave half of me to be able to be Mekudeshes to another man. Now, to another woman. It doesn't really mean half. It just means, that's his way of saying that he wants to still be able to be Mekadesh another woman. Amarle Mar Zutra Brei de Rav Mari. Ravina, Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Mari, said to Ravina, V'nifshitu la Kiddushi bekula. When he says that to her, I want to be Mekudeshes to half of you, why doesn't it work? We should say that Kiddushin that he said on part of her spreads to the whole of her, and it's really Mekudeshes to the whole of her. Why doesn't it work? Milo Tanya, didn't we learn in a Brisa the following when it comes to Karbanos? Ha'omer ragla shel zu ola tehe kula ola. If a person says about an animal that the leg should be an ola, should be a carbon ola, a burnt offering, elevation offering, the whole thing is an ola. It spreads, you say the leg, but it means the whole thing, it spreads the whole thing. Va'afilu madamar ein kula ola. And even according to the opinion that disagrees and holds it doesn't spread to the whole thing. That's only when he sanctifies for a carbon, for an offering, a part that's not a life, a essential organ for the animal to live. But if he sanctifies a part of the animal that's an essential organ, that the animal can't live without, Habyakula Ola, then we say that the whole thing becomes an Ola. Then it is considered the whole thing is an Ola. So here also, he sanctified half the woman, she needs her half, so we should say everybody will agree that it should spread to the whole thing as Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Midami, are these two cases really similar? Hasam Behema. There it's an animal. You're sanctifying an animal, it spreads to the rest. Hacha das acheres. Here it's another thinking person. And not only that, but we need her agreement and we need her intent, her intention for this Kiddushin to work. And if he says, I'm being Mekudeshes to half of you, then if she only wants for half of her to become Mekudeshes, well, that's going to be a problem, and that's what she's agreeing to. That won't work. So there's another person's intent and intentions at play here. And that's why when he says to a woman that half of you should be Mekudeshes, it shouldn't work. Halo Damya, the Gemara says, what is it more similar to? It's more similar to the following. Lahadam Rabbi Yochanan, to that which Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said, Behema shel shnei shutfin. If there's a behema, there's an animal that belongs to two partners. Hikdish chatzia. If one of the partners was mekadesh his half, he sanctified his half for a carbon. So now you have half the animal is sanctified for the carbon, the other half isn't. Can you bring that as a carbon? No. Is it going to spread? No, because there's another person's intent here. There's another owner, and he didn't want it to be Kiddushin, to be hektish. So that's what it's similar to, and there it doesn't work. And what does happen over there? Let's say v'chazar v'lakcha. Let's say the first partner who sanctified the first half now buys the other half from the second partner, v'kdisha, and he's makdish it, he sanctifies it as a carbon. Kedusha. It works to give the animal kedusha. The animal is considered holy, sanctified. Ve'ena kreva, but you can't bring it as a carbon. Since originally when he first sanctified it, it was partially sanctified and it wasn't fit to bring as a carbon, so now it's deferred. It's dichoy. We'll talk about it in a moment. It's not able to be brought as a carbon. Ve'oset tamura. And if one tries to bring an animal in exchange for it, which you're not allowed to do normally with the carbon. And when you try to do that, the other animal is called a tamura, and you still have to bring the first animal, but you also have to bring the second animal. So if a person tries to make a tamura, a trade-in, on this animal that became sanctified for a carbon in stages, first the first half, then the second half. So if you try to trade in another animal for that, it works that to create the other one, give it the status of tamura. Remember, the first one, though, stays sanctified always by tamura. Utmurasa kayotseba. The tamura becomes like it, meaning that the exchanged animal that you tried to trade in also now is holy, but can't be brought as a carbon. That's the halacha. So the point of our Gemara bringing it in is that you see that the idea of sanctifying half of a woman, her intent makes a difference. So that's similar to when one partner sanctifies his half of the animal. It doesn't mean the whole animal is sanctified, because there's another partner, and his intent makes a difference. Now the Gemara concludes that we learn from this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan 3 things about karbanos and dichlei, and the deference of karbanos. Shma mina tlas. We learn from here 3 things. Top of Zayin Amud Beis, it says Shma mina balei chayim nidchim. First of all, we learn that even though the animal wasn't shechted yet, it was still alive when the Omer sanctified the first half. But since at that point, when only half of it was sanctified, it couldn't be brought as a carbon, and it was deferred, it's considered deferred, you can't bring it anymore. And we see that could be true even when the animal is not yet slaughtered. And that's a machlokas, that's debated, but we see from this brisa, or at least this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, that he held that even while it's still alive, it could be deferred and canceled, that you can't bring it, disqualified. Ushmamina dichlei meikara hava dichlei. We also learn that he holds that there's dichlei meikara. There's dichlei from the outset. There is an opinion that dichlei, that deference, disqualification, can only happen once it's fit to be brought as a carbon, and then something happens to it that makes it unfit. Then even if it returns, it's too late. It's deferred already. But that's only once it was already fit to be brought as a carbon. But here, it was never at that stage. It was never sanctified where sanctification worked, where it was ready to be brought as a carbon. And yet, Rabbi Yochanan holds that it still could be deferred and disqualified. So he holds that it could be deferred, disqualified from the outset. It doesn't need to first be near. It doesn't have to first be fit and then be disqualified. Even from the outset, it could be disqualified. Once it's deferred, once you say, oh, it's half of it is sanctified, and that doesn't work, so you can never bring this carbon. Ushma mina, and the third thing we learn is yesh dichlei b'damim. That dichlei can occur with money. Meaning that, in this case, he never meant to bring this as a carbon, really. What he really meant to do, because I think because it's only half his. It's only half his. So he never really meant that he was going to sanctify it to actually bring as a carbon. What he really meant was to make it hektish, and then to redeem the monetary value towards a carbon or something, towards the Beis HaMikdash. I guess towards buying a carbon. It was because it was never fit that you would bring half the animal. So what did he mean in the first place? What he meant was that the money should be hektish, should be sanctified, the value, and you would redeem that money and redeem the half animal and use the money for holy purposes. But he never really meant it for a carbon. Only once he then bought the rest of it was it maybe possible for it to be brought as a carbon. But originally he was only makdash it l'damim, for the value. And yet, since at that moment it wasn't fit to be brought as a carbon, so even when it later becomes fit, it cannot be brought as a carbon, it's deferred, even though the original sanctification, the original hektish was only for the purpose of the value, not for a carbon. Still the dichlei, the deference takes effect, and it can never be brought as a carbon. So those are the three things that we learn from Rabbi Yochanan's teaching. Number one, that it could be deferred even while it's still alive, even before it's shefted. Number two, it could be deferred from the outset before it even really became fit to be brought as a carbon, and then was disqualified. No, even though it was disqualified before it ever became fit, it could be disqualified. And number three, even though it was only sanctified for the value, it can be disqualified.